think, and just while you're getting yourself set up, I shall introduce you with your full title of your presentation. So, our final presentation this evening is from Natalie Saunders, whose presentation is entitled Blending In, Exploring the Social Complexities of Going Through Adolescence as an Autistic Girl. And I will pass straight over to Natalie. Yep, we can see that. Brilliant, Natalie.
Excellent, wonderful, because it's not normally my friend technology, so wonderful, that's great. Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Natalie, as Allison just said. I'm a PhD student. I'm actually, in fact, one of Allison's PhD students. She's my wonderful supervisor. And I'm also a lecturer in criminology at Wrexham University as well. I identify as a girl, so my pronouns are she and her. And I am not considered to be neurodivergent, which I just think is important to say, that obviously I've been as considerate as I can with my research, and I've checked understanding with everything with all my participants. But obviously it's just important to note that my research has not been done through the lens of someone who is autistic, so it doesn't have that added benefit. And before I started my PhD, I actually worked full time in an autism specialist school. And that's sort of where I kind of sort of came up with this kind of topic area of interest of mine. So I worked in a class that had three girls in it with who autistic girls. And I just noticed that the friendships they were forming were really, really difficult for them. Both they'd come from sort of mainstream schools where friendships had been hard for them to come across and sort of find people that they trusted and stuff. And then even in a specialist education setting, they found it really hard to maintain connections with each other as well. So it just sort of led me to believe that this would be an area that would be worth researching. Obviously, as we know, like isolation can be a big issue within neurodivergent populations. So that's what sort of prompted this research. So my aims in my research were to investigate how autistic girls perceive friendships and investigate how autistic girls' friendships will change and develop over time. So why girls? So autistic girls are considered better for self-referential abilities. So they're able to sort of reflect on themselves and consider their actions and convincingly mask their autistic traits. So they're able to observe what other people are doing around them and sort of like copycat behaviors and stuff just to kind of blend in, which obviously means that we have a lot less girls with an autism diagnosis than boys because they tend to fly under the radar. So they tend to have a more understanding of what's expected socially and then they alter their behavior to meet them expectations and then behave accordingly. But because of this, what we have is a massive population of males in so when we're doing research with autistic populations, what we tend to have is, even though a sample size might be made up of just a collective of neurodiverse individuals, what you'll find is that most of that population will be males anyway, because more males have an autism diagnosis than females. So it was really important for me when I was doing this research that I really wanted to solely focus on the female autistic experience and really capture their voices firsthand and make sure we were really narrowing down that demographic to just make sure we're getting what females are experiencing without it being broader and more dominated by males. Female friendships are also a lot more complex than males. So males tend to be more focused on activity-based relationships, so sort of playing football or having video game sessions and things like that. And it's all very these doing activities that don't have a lot of emphasis on talking. This social interaction tends to be a lot more minimal, really, in that sort of face-to-face talking kind of context. Whereas girls tend to have all these relationships that are based on sort of like maybe like gossiping or secret sharing. It's a lot more face-to-face and a lot more sort of focus on the talking aspect of things. They also have a lot of other elements which make their interactions a lot more sort of complex as well. So we have these sort of microaggressions like eye rolling behaviors, or like not talking to people and ignoring people, which can be really difficult to understand if you don't understand like the sort of context of what's going on, which can lead autistic girls to sort of wonder what on earth is going on and then not really catch up with what's going on around them in terms of these relationships. So it was really interesting to me to find out how these girls were experiencing friendships. So I recruited my participants through social media adverts and or parents of autistic girls I already knew. So I sort of put an advert together and just sort of put it across platforms. Instagram was really brilliant for this. There's a lot of autistic sort of groups that you get together. So I could share it in these sort of like environments where they were really inclusive of each other, and they would sort of then pass the research onto their friends and stuff that they thought might want to be involved as well. So that's kind of how I ended up recruiting my participants. I decided to do all my interviews over email, so they were e-interviews, and I did that for a couple of reasons. So when I first started this research, it was the middle of the pandemic, so I did want to sort of COVID-proof my research. I wanted to make sure that I could continue to do it even if we ended up going into another lockdown. And e-interviews was brilliant for that because it meant it wouldn't have to stop if Boris put us into another lockdown. But on top of that, when I researched it more and more, I thought this was a really brilliant idea and a really good way of doing things, because it really gave people the opportunity to sort of really take that time to process the questions that they were being asked. So when it obviously you get it in an email, you get it in the written format, so you can take your time to read it and understand what is really being asked. It also helps you formulate your response a lot slower as well. So you can really consider what information you're giving up. So on a face-to-face interview, there's that demand really to sort of give an answer there and then. But with an email interview, you can really think about what you're sort of saying and maybe go back and change it and think, actually, I don't think I want to share that with them, and I'll take that back out. Or maybe go away and reflect on what I've been asked and things like that. And some of the girls sort of talked about like going back to like pictures and diary entries and things to see what was going on at different points in their life. So they're able to really reflect back and sort of give me a more thorough, thoughtful answer. And it also meant that they could respond at a time that was more convenient for them as well. So these interviews tended to go on for months as well. So I think most of them, I think it lasted about 2 months. We're back and forth for over 2 months, this sort of conversation. So it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't like an instant messaging type of thing. I might email them one evening and they'd maybe wouldn't reply till the following evening, or I might sort of send one in the morning and then maybe a week later at midnight I would get one. So it really gave that flexibility for them to be in the right frame of mind to want to engage in what has been said, and sort of have time to think about their answer and then report back. So yeah, that was it was another added benefit really to conducting them. I felt like I got a lot richer data out of my participants in a way that I felt they were much more comfortable with. And then I analysed my data through Van Meinen's Life World Existentials and used that to guide my analysis. So Van Meinen's Life World Existentials are sort of concepts that describe how we understand and describe the human experience. So the four in the study that I used were made up of live space. So it's our environment, it's the way we relate to the physical environment around us, whether that be sort of a classroom or bedrooms, wherever we are, the social settings we sit in. It's about how we feel in different environments, and that's why that matters, because some spaces can be more comfortable than others and make us feel a certain way, and it can also shape how we behave in them environments. So if we sit in a school place as a student, obviously we enter a sort of student role. If we're in work, then we're an employee role, whereas if we're at home, we might be mum, or we might be a sister, or we might just be a person in your home environment, you know. It really sort of changes who we are and how we act, and the sort of that role we encompass as well. The other one was live body, so that's the felt experience we have. So that can obviously be physical, if we're talking about things like, you know, our physical bodies, how we feel. Do we feel comfortable in a moment? Do we feel anxious? And it can be emotional as well. So, you know, are we happy? Are we sad? What's the impact on the experience on our own bodies? The other one was live time. So the personal subjective sense of time. So obviously we also we have time that obviously consists of minutes and hours and days and years, etc. But time is also subjective. So in a sense that we might just spend a whole day at Alton Towers and an hour might feel like a minute, or the whole day might feel like you've only been there 5 minutes, and it passes into like so quickly because you're having such a good time. And then obviously on the alternative side of that, you can have lived time in the sense that you might be waiting to go in for an exam or something like that, and you might be sitting outside waiting for 10 minutes, but actually it feels like you've been sat there for hours waiting to go in to get started. So the time can be really subjective in that sense. And then there's 4, which is lived human relation, which was obviously probably the most significant in my study. And it's how we experience the relationships we have with each other as well, and how that encompasses social connections and relationships with others. So my participants so far, these are some of the things that they've reported struggling with so far. So non-verbal communication was something that they struggle with in friendships. So like I said before, those sort of microaggressions, the eye rolling things, and people aren't talking to people, or when they ignore you for whatever reason, really struggling to understand like when that was happening or why that is happening, could be really confusing for them. Not knowing when someone becomes a friend, which was really interesting, came out with a lot of people. They said that you have these sort of levels of friendship. So, you have, maybe an acquaintance, and then you might have a friend, and then you might have a best friend. And it was really struggling to know when you cross them boundaries from being just an acquaintance into a friend, or even when a friend crosses into a best friend. And they said they found it quite embarrassing sometimes. So they might suggest doing something with somebody who they would have considered a friend. So maybe somebody that they were in college with, and they've suggested maybe they meet up outside of college. But the other person doesn't feel that way. They actually don't see them as anything more than an acquaintance they sit with in college or whatever. And then obviously finding that really confusing, because it's like, well, we act like friends and we talk like friends, but when we're out of this environment, are we not friends? So that was really confusing as well. Keeping up with fast-paced conversations in a group. So the girls reported that when they're in a group of people, especially if there was more than just them and another person, conversations can move quite quickly. So it might bounce from subject to subject, then go back to the subjects. But if the participant in particular had more of a sort of processing time that they needed to really think about what was being said before they replied, then that could be really difficult. So they're still processing what's been said a second ago, but then the conversation's already moved on. And that was really difficult because they felt really excluded from the whole conversation as a whole, because they're missing their slots to sort of jump in and give their response, because by the time they like sort of processed what had been said and they thought about how they felt about it and then sort of formulated their own response, it was really difficult to then jump in with it because maybe the conversation moved on and it was no longer appropriate. So that was really a real struggle too. Not being able to tell if somebody likes them. So this was sort of like a human sort of tendency to be nice to everybody. Especially if you're in maybe a workplace with somebody or in school with somebody, and the general consensus is that we're all just nice to everybody. They really found it hard to tell whether someone was just being nice because they were being nice, and that's what you do, or if someone was being nice to them because they genuinely wanted a more meaningful friendship with them, or that they had like a lot of bad experience in the past where people had been very avoidant with them and stuff, and they really struggled to understand if somebody liked them generally because they'd never really found that people did warm to them very easily anyway. So I think one of our participants did actually said I really struggled to believe that somebody does genuinely like me, which was really hard as well. Trusting people to stick around. So that was one of the other things that came out. Obviously, as people's life courses sort of progress, people move on, friendship groups change. So even if it's like a geographical thing, so if people move away from a certain town, there was an expectation that maybe they would still come back and visit, or, if they sort of left primary school and went to different high schools, the expectation was that they would still meet up every Saturday. And that wouldn't always happen. So they weren't sure at what points these friendships sometimes end naturally. Or it just sort of came abruptly. So there was never whether to trust somebody and whether they were going to be there for a long time. Were they a sort of forever friend, or were they just they're there and then? So that was a real trust thing. So they tended to keep people at arm's length just in case they couldn't trust them to be around, and then they'd have to go through the heartbreak of being upset when they moved on. Talking to new people, so just the dauntingness of actually striking up a conversation with somebody new and knowing what to talk about could be quite intimidating. So a lot of the participants reported that they would rather somebody else come up to talk to them and just started the conversation rather than relying on them to start the conversation. Feeling left behind when friendship circles got bigger. So a lot of the participants reported that they had like a single best friend that they were really, really close to. And then when sort of time would move on and maybe other people would come into that friendship circle, they reported feeling really left behind because they'd sort of get lost in the numbers and they'd really struggle not having that one-to-one friendship anymore the same. And it almost felt like exclusion when they didn't have the focus of the one person that was kind of their best friend. And then a lot of people sort of reported like sort of withdrawing from the larger group, probably because socializing just got so much more difficult when there was more people around. So they tended to withdraw from it and then end up like being left behind from their friendship circle. Pressure to say the right thing and not offend anybody came up. So just even the literal fact of just, do I look nice in this dress? No, not really. And finding that, there was this sort of social rule around it. If you asked questions like that, you just say yes. Or, you maybe subtly redirect them to something else. That was one of the things that came out, that they were never quite sure whether they were saying the right thing or they were going to accidentally offend somebody. So that brought a lot of anxiety around what to say next and stuff. So that was really difficult. And trusting people too much. So telling people that you think are friends secrets and expecting them to keep them, to then find out actually they probably weren't as good of a friend as you maybe anticipated they were going to be. And then things getting sort of been told to other people that they didn't have consent to talk about. So trusting people too much as well. And emotionally draining. So finding that socializing was really emotionally draining. So there was this tendency to say yes to everything that they were invited to because they didn't want to get left out of anything or get left behind, but then actually finding that they were quite overwhelmed by the amount of social plans that they were being involved in, especially if they'd done a full day of school first and then they were expected to go and socialise afterwards. Actually, it was just a little bit too much, and then this could lead to feelings of burnout. So when I went through my findings, I tried to categorise my themes that I've got under each of these existentials. So 9 themes emerged from the data, so I've listed them all there and obviously put them under subheadings that they came under. But obviously, in the interest of time today, I thought I probably wouldn't discuss every single one of them. I would just go for 4 of them instead. So we're going to look at masking to others, feeling burnt out, online spaces, and the longevity of friendships. So under lived human relations came masking to others. So obviously masking is the unconscious or unconscious process by which autistic people mimic and imitate social behaviours, gestures, expressions, speech patterns to fit in with societal norms. As I say societal norm, I mean neurotypical societal norms. So participants reported using masking to fit in and make friends with their peer group. So they would copy what everybody else was doing, what they were wearing, what their interests were, the way they spoke, the way they acted, and obviously reiterate sort of thought processes and things like that to sort of fit in with what everybody else was saying. So, even something as simple as like, oh God, maths is really boring. And they would maybe repeat that even though they found maths fascinating, just because it was what everybody else was saying, so they would fit in. But that led to participants feeling like they had to put on like a degree of a performance, which led them to always worry about whether they were going to get it right or not. So were people going to see through this masking persona that they were putting on, or were they going to get caught out? Like, you say you hate maths, but actually you're really good at maths. And so how can you say you hate it? That kind of thing. And it led participants just felt like they were really disconnected from their authentic selves. So over and over again, if you're behaving like somebody that doesn't align with who you really are, you can start to feel disconnected from your own interests and your own hobbies. And actually what you end up with is a friendship that is based on this masked version of yourself rather than one that is actually aligned with who you really are, and their real character. So then these friendships became quite disingenuous. Burnt out came under the live body. So burnout refers to the state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that can occur when autistic individuals, due to the ongoing demands and challenges associated with navigating the world that doesn't cater to neurodiversity. So participants reported having to take time away from social situations to manage burnout. So, for example, saying no to a lot of sort of social plans, or maybe not going into school because they actually got so overwhelmed with the demands of being social all day. It just became far too much. One of the participants actually found it really difficult in college and they went through a really tough time. trying to keep up with the friendship circle and trying to be involved and constantly like trying to avoid not being left behind by the friends, that actually when they finished school, they ended up staying in the house for about a year afterwards. And they really, really struggled because they were just that burnt out from everything they'd been through for the last 2 years. So one of the participants said as well, when they were burnt out, they would report feeling mute. So they felt like if they had to go into school and they were forced into some situations, they'd be there sort of embodied, but they wouldn't really be participating. So they would just switch off, and they said they just wouldn't really speak. They would just go mute and just sort of go through the motions of school until they could get home and then finally start to unwind again. And then participants said they purposely kept less friends so social contact could be managed. So they would literally deliberately keep a smaller group of friends so that they weren't asked out for too many social events, or they didn't have to deal with speaking to too many people at break times. And they could just keep everything a lot more manageable. So they would deliberately like keep people and ignore people and keep them out of the social circle because it just meant that there was more people to deal with. And burnout caused a lot of guilt for participants because they felt really bad when they were turning down invitations to avoid interacting with others. So they got to that point that they were like, my social limit is reached this week, I'm not going out this weekend. And they'd say no to their friends, and they'd get invited, and probably with the best will in the world, they would want to go, but they couldn't bring themselves to because they were just done for that week. Their social battery was completely drained. But then that obviously brought feelings of guilt all weekend of everybody else having fun without them and that they weren't going, and then, feeling bad for rejecting their friends when they suggested doing something nice. Under lived space, we had online friendships. So participants said that online friendships were easier to maintain because it removes a lot of the non-verbal communication that you get in face-to-face communication. And instead, what you get are things like emojis, which are a lot easier to interpret because the context is there given to you straight away. It also means that people are really explicit with what they're saying, and they really explain it. So, if something's meant to be funny, it's chased up with a haha or an LOL. So it's a joke. Because you haven't got that face-to-face thing and you can't go off somebody's non-verbal communication, you have to be really explicit because it's over through a screen. It also removes the anxiety of impulsively saying the wrong thing. So in a social situation, it is really, I know just as well as everybody else, it's a lot easier to open your mouth and say something before your brain's actually had time to think about what you're saying. So online communication removes that impulsivity. So you've got to go through the motions of typing your answer out. Which obviously takes time. And then by the time you've had time to type it out, you probably had time to think about it. And they might then go back and go, actually, I don't want to tell them that. Or maybe I shouldn't say it like that. How can I rephrase that? So it takes away that anxiety of, oh God, am I going to offend somebody? Am I going to tell them something I don't want to tell them? It also gives them more time to process what's been said, and it removes the pressure of replying straight away. So this was really interesting that they had time to obviously read the communication, so that's obviously a lot easier to process if you've got it written, and you can reread it as well, so you can experience it for a second time and really interpret what is being said. And also you can reply whenever you want to. So exactly as I found with my interviews, it meant that they could reply in their own time. They didn't have to reply instantaneously. If it was over email or even if it was over something like Facebook Messenger, it didn't really matter when they replied as long as they did eventually. Or, even if they didn't have the energy to reply there and then, they could literally just like the message or heart it or whatever. And it, you can acknowledge it and be friendly, but you might not have to engage in replying until you're ready. And that could be if after you've had a break from socializing. Which brings me on to the next point, which means they could take a break from socializing and rest when online, unlike in real life. So if they've reached their limit for that day, they could turn off the computer and go to bed and then reply in the morning. Whereas in real life, it's a lot harder to just walk away from people because you've had enough of socializing. But yeah, you can take that break whenever you want and then pick it back up again, which was a lot easier. And some participants reported that some of their friendships were exclusively online. They'd never met in person. So there's these really lovely, obviously, autistic communities online where they've got a chance to sort of make friends with other autistic girls of even similar ages, with similar interests or whatever. And they might have never met purely because they don't live anywhere near each other. But these friendships could be really meaningful and, be really worthwhile and be very significant to each person, it didn't make it any less profound that they were online. They were still as important as they were like face-to-face friendships. Longevity of friendships was under lived time. So friends don't have to be in your life forever. A lot of people said that it was a lot easier to sort of get their head around friendships when they understood that friends can just be for a chapter of your life, but not necessarily the whole story. So they can be important and meaningful for certain periods of your life. So through high school or in college, or, if you do a certain hobby and you see each other at a club or whatever, but you don't have to stay friends past that. So when these things come to a natural close, it's easy to move on from that friendship because that friend was just for that one portion of my life. Once the periods pass, the friendships move on, and that's okay. It's natural. There's no feelings of rejection because that friendship was only meant for that moment. Participants said when they could manage their expectations of a friendship and knew it would come to a natural close, they were able to avoid feelings of rejection and being let down. So when they knew that this person was only in their life for this particular reason or for this particular time frame, it was a lot easier to deal with it if that friendship did end up sort of withering away and coming to a close. They knew it wasn't personal, it was just because it was the nature of that friendship. And also knowing that a friendship has an expiration point doesn't make it less valuable. So even though they might go into it knowing that this is going to not last forever, they were able to value it in that moment in time and give it the worth and value that it was. So a successful friendship can include meeting up to do separate activities together. So, for example, arranging to meet up, go around to somebody's house. One person's doing their homework, another person's making tea, or they're watching a TV program, but somebody else is playing on their phone. It can be a social situation that is like sort of more about parallel play with each other, and they're not going to be focused on the same activity. It doesn't make it any less worthwhile. Socialising online, as we discussed earlier, friendships can be a lot easier if they can be maintained online. Setting expectations for socialising. So this was another one that came up quite a lot. Just even as simple as, where are we going, what are we doing, and how long will we be there for, and is anybody else going to turn up? So are we going to the park? Okay, what are we doing? Are we going to be there all day? Or are we just going for a walk for an hour? Is any of your other friends going to come with you? Should I expect to be surprised because somebody else is going to be meeting us there? It made it a lot easier to sort of prepare themselves for what they were going to be doing, and also, do they have the energy to do that? So, maybe I've got the energy to come for one drink after work, but I've not got the energy for a whole night out. So let me know before I go what I should prepare myself for. Understand I don't mean to be mean to me when I'm being blunt. So some people in the study said that they'd managed to sort of get to a place with their friends where they could say, I know what I'm saying, and sometimes I don't realise I'm being blunt and hurtful. So please just know what you know about me and know that I'm not somebody who would ever want to hurt or upset you. So if it comes across that way, that probably wasn't my intention. Understanding I might need a break from socialising, you might not hear from me for a while. So expecting that actually, I might go off radar for a week or a couple of weeks or even a month. And then I might resurface again later. And it doesn't mean you've stopped being important to me. It just maybe means I'm burnt out or I've got other things going on. So you might not hear from me, but don't rule me out. Clarifying when we have become friends. A lot of my participants said it's actually easier to be able to just say, have we become friends yet? Are we there yet? Is it, has our relationship got to a point where we can go for a drink together or we can go to the movies together? And then that just sort of took the ambiguity out of it and didn't have to have that fear of rejection. Only socialising for a short amount of time. So genuinely just invite me out anyway and I'll come, but I might just only come for a little bit. And expect that that's okay for me because I still want to be included, but I might not want to be out for the whole night. Non-human friendships. So some participants reported that having friendships with animals remove the judgmental nature of human beings, which obviously is really nice when you've got a complete acceptance from somebody regardless and it's unconditional. So they said some of the friendships that they had were actually considerate with their pets or their parents' pets and things like that. And invite and include me even if you think I will say no. So it was really more about choice. Like, don't assume anything about me. I will come if I want to come, but please don't make that decision for me by not including and inviting me. I'll make that decision for myself and give me the autonomy to pick, whether I'm going to come or not. Because sometimes I might and sometimes I might not. But don't assume to know me was basically the undercurrent of that one. So in conclusion, so I thought a lot about what my themes sort of said to me, and I came up with the idea that actually friendships is a matter of accessibility. So accessibility is not just a matter of physical accommodations or having technology adapted. It can also be inclusive of societal and cultural barriers that prevent people from engaging and participating in different aspects of life. And I think this is one of those aspects of life where accessibility really matters. Um, and this basically said that one of the main barriers to girls accessing friendships was the need for greater understanding and accommodations in social interactions. So having friends they could have a mask with and they could inform authentic friendships with, having that understanding from their friends, that what they present to them, if it was blunt or if it was, maybe came across as mean or hurtful, but having that understanding that actually this person would never want to be like that. Or the understanding that you might not hear from me for a little while, but don't rule me out. I will come back to you. Them kind of things, and just knowing that about their friends, and being like, well, that's okay. I'm still going to be here when you're finished and when you come back. Social settings also played a part in accessing friendships. So having an environment that was conducive to forming bonds and socialising. Obviously, a lot of what came out was about online friendships where they can control the environment was easier. So it wasn't necessarily even just the fact that these friendships were online. It was the fact that they were able to socialise in a way where they could control the environment around them. They could control the sensory input, what music was playing, who was in the room, who was around them, that kind of thing. And that could translate to a physical environment. So if you can control the environment, i.e., don't invite me for a coffee in a coffee shop because I'm going to hate it, but could we go somewhere quieter for that? Or could we go and get something to go and go around the park with them? Where it's going to be quieter. When we've got that option to control the environment, actually socialising can become a lot easier. And having agency to foster friendships which align with their own personal needs. So a lot of this was based on understanding of autism and being allowed to allow themselves to have friendships that might look different to others. So this came hand in hand with having a diagnosis. So having an understanding of what their own needs were, what it meant for them to be able to have a fulfilling friendship, and then being able to accept that that might not look like a friendship that you see on TV, or it might not look like a friendship that you see amongst your other people in school. Just because you don't hang out every Saturday night or have sleepovers every weekend does not make your friendship any less than anybody else's if that's not working for you. So it was really about sort of having the agency to be like, no, these are my needs. This is what's comfortable for me. So that's what I'm going to base my friendship on. So that was all. I will thank you for listening, everybody. And I would like to open it up if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And you managed to get right to the end, and then they decided to, oh, they're gonna have a little bark, didn't they? The
Oh,
little
did you hear them?
only because my ears are attuned to it, aren't they? Um, so lots of comments. So one that I can just see that has come on from Lily, which is so thank you. What was the age range, and did you see any difference in views between age groups?
So this was really interesting. So my age range initially went from 11 to 16. But what was difficult was I found that I only had one 11-year-old that took part in the study, and the rest all tend to be 15, 16. And the conclusion I came to was actually because obviously what they were going through was quite traumatic in terms of friendships and that transition from primary school to high school, that probably a lot of them weren't really ready to talk about it yet. So then I opened it up to 30 in the end in the name of recruiting more participants. And then I did get a lot more. And a lot of what people were saying was a lot of the same thing, that the friendships were really complicated and they spent a lot of time isolated and feeling very lonely. And I think that the girls that were still going through that, it was probably just too much to want to take part in a study and talk about it. So even though my age range was quite broad, I did have a lot less at the younger age and a lot more towards the older range.
Um, there were lots of comments as you were talking about people saying that this resonated with them. Jack said he's going to be in touch with you about his
Oh,
research.
amazing.
There was a question earlier on which is about I think it's a general issue around sort of well, all research with neurodivergent participants, and it's something that has come up sort of relatively recently in some research, which is how do we combat people who just want to do the interview for any potential monetary gain, if there was any, especially if it's over email, and I think it isn't just email that some people have expressed this as being an issue with, but so people who aren't really autistic but pretending to be so to get um, whatever incentive.
Yeah. Um, to be honest, I hadn't actually considered that people would take part if they weren't autistic. I didn't think they would, but there was no monetary gain for my study. It wasn't financially motivating for participants at all. It was literally just about taking part. And I do think that the length of the interviews, just with them going on for months and months, even if I had offered some kind of financial compensation, they'd have gone about 2p an hour, so it wouldn't have been worth it anyway.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Damien. Um, yeah, as Jack similarly.
But just thank everybody and great presentations and comments in the chat. Really good discussions going on.
Yeah, really.
So,
All
for
right.
the producers, try and look back over the chat before you log off if you can.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? So yeah, do the best. So thank you, Damien.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right, take care, Damien. Jack, similarly, participants had no monetary gain, but did get a good response. This has given people ideas about sort of Karen about how to support my daughter better, and people that come across in work. Trying to go back. There's been so much active, and as I go back, more comments keep appearing. Based on what you identified, this is Nathan, based on what you identified with the 11-year-old, is there a plan to bring your data to them to provide pathways to meaningful relationships?
Well, sorry, are you asking me if I've got any ideas for meaningful relationships for 11-year-olds?
Yeah.
Is that to me, I think you really could start at the level of education, really. I think informing schools and of what you might end up coming across with your students, and then being mindful that maybe when you do sort of like working, so I don't know if it's still PHSE or whatever it is, about friendships and bullying and that kind of thing, that actually maybe we need to be including this kind of thing and maybe as part of a curriculum and informing sort of students. Like, we need to stop putting the onus on neurodivergent people to start conforming to sort of neurotypical norms, and actually maybe we need to look at like the rest of the student population and say, can we all be a bit more accommodating? Can we all be more inclusive? And like sort of look at friendships in different ways. Friendships can look completely different to different people, and we need to embrace that. So that would be my understanding. I actually have had a high school reach out to me in the past and ask if they could use my slides and my presentation to sort of inform training in theirs. So hopefully this is a movement in the right direction, really.
Absolutely. And I did see a really great explanation of rhizomes, which chat should hopefully be available afterwards, and I've lost it now. Oh, there we go. From a botanist, but rhizomes are the straight, chunky, linear bits. Some of the discussions about the adventitious roots. Oh, I like that word. That come off of them. They're tangled, non-linear bits. Rhizomes themselves tend to be very straight lines and can be divided into sections and survive as independent specimens. So thank you. Yeah, as Damien says, a great reply and a great explanation. Another comment. So yes, we need to protect autistic children from bullying and being taken advantage of, which was something that came through quite a lot in your research findings, but that's about making sure that neurotypical peers take more responsibility, making them more aware. And then Richard asked, do you think training would vary depending on schools and age range, or?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's another avenue, isn't it, to look at? I think got the advantage that people, when who have got a diagnosis and have an understanding of their own needs, they also tend to be a lot older. So, I mean, obviously, support would probably still be needed, but maybe not as much so as maybe a younger person who's still trying to learn what their identity means to them and understand their own wants and needs. So, probably you would need more heavier support with at a younger level. And actually, we should be providing this sort of education at a younger level because that's what they're taking through with them. By the time you get into sort of older years, it's getting too late and things have already been done to people, and they've experienced that kind of trauma through friendships and things as well. So I think tailoring it would be a good idea, but I think at the same time I do think it should be bottom heavy and we really should be getting in it like earlier interventions.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you say, Camellia, how do we stop autistic children from being bullied? You can't force non-autistic children to be friends with autistic children, although I suppose having some, better understanding and better education that may mitigate that would be a step in the right direction.
I agree. You can't stop the bullying, and you can't force people to be friends. But I mean, I suppose at the least level you could do is make whatever level of friendship they're going to give that person, even if it is a very sort of acquaintance sort of based one, is they could make that as comfortable as possible for both of them, really. And so no one's saying you've got to be best friends with everybody all of the time, but if you can treat people with respect and make it accommodating for people at any level, then that's worth doing.